Picture the worst moment of his life. Nails through his hands. His lungs fighting for every breath. Hours since anyone has given him water. He says 2 words. I thirst. And someone, a soldier, a stranger, maybe someone who never believed a word he preached, runs over, dips a sponge into a jar sitting nearby, ties it to a branch, and lifts it to his mouth. That's not a scene from a movie. That's the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 29. It happened exactly the way it's written down. Here's what almost nobody tells you. Whatever was in that jar wasn't water, and it wasn't really wine either. It was something Roman soldiers carried into battle for centuries. Something legionaries drank instead of plain water. Because, in a strange way, it was actually the safer choice. Historians still argue about whether handing it to a dying man was an act of mercy or an act of mockery. We're coming back to that jar. But to understand what was actually in it, and why it mattered, you first need to understand what people drank every single day for thousands of years before that moment, at weddings, at wells, through famines, in ordinary kitchens. Coffee wasn't part of any of it. It wouldn't reach this part of the world for another 1,400 years. So what filled the cup instead? Stick around. This gets good. Part 1. Water. Let's start at the bottom. Literally. Outside the West Bank, city of Nablus sits a well that hasn't moved in 2,000 years. It's not a traditional site, nobody can verify. It's solid stone and real water, and it's been measured by visitors across the centuries. Records from the 1930s put its full depth at over 130 feet, cut straight down through bedrock. That's not a backyard water feature. That's days of brutal labor done by someone who needed water badly enough to dig it by hand. That's the well where Jesus sat down, worn out from a journey, and asked a Samaritan woman for a drink. Quick question. When's the last time you were actually thirsty? Not I should drink more water thirsty. Dry mouth, dizzy, can't think straight thirsty. Most of us in the modern world have never really felt that. Not once. In 1st century Judea, that feeling was a daily negotiation. Water didn't come from a tap. It came from a hole in the ground someone's grandfather had dug, or a stone cistern that caught winter rain, and you carried it home on your shoulder in a clay jar, and you did not waste a single drop of it. That's what makes the story in John chapter 4 so strange, once you actually sit with it. Jesus, a Jewish man, asks a Samaritan woman, someone his culture had taught him not to even speak to, for a drink. Then he tells her, he can offer water. That means she'll never be thirsty again. To a woman who had walked to that well in the heat of the afternoon, specifically to avoid the crowd, who knew exactly what a well that never runs dry was worth. That wasn't some abstract metaphor floating in the air. That was the single most valuable thing anyone had ever offered her. Here's the science. Since we're doing this properly, your body is roughly 60% water, and you lose 2 to 3 liters of it a day just by existing, sweating, breathing, staying alive. In a hot, dry climate like the Jordan Valley, that number climbs fast. Lose just 2% of your body weight in water, and your concentration drops, your mood turns, your body starts pulling moisture from wherever it can find it. Decades before Jesus was born, King Hezekiah's engineers in Jerusalem went even further, carving a tunnel roughly 500 meters long straight through solid rock to secure the city's water supply during a siege. A tunnel you can still wade through today, in the dark, with water up around your ankles. People in this world weren't digging wells and tunnels for convenience. They were doing it because the alternative was death, and everyone knew it. So the drink of the Bible that mattered most, every single day, wasn't some exotic specialty item at all. It was the one thing that demanded the most effort to get, which might be exactly why we've stopped noticing it now that it's free and instant. But water alone doesn't get a shepherd through until sundown. For that, you need something with real substance in it. And the Bible has one very specific phrase for exactly that. Part 2. Milk. You've heard the phrase, a land flowing with milk and honey, more times than you can count. It shows up in Exodus chapter 3, when God first tells Moses what the promised land will be like. And it repeats throughout the Torah, like a refrain. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Why milk? Not wine. Not grain. Not gold. Milk. In the hill country of ancient Canaan, cattle were genuinely hard to keep. There wasn't enough flat pasture for large herds. What people actually raised were goats and sheep, and what those animals gave back, every single day without fail, was milk. That's exactly why, when 3 mysterious visitors show up at Abraham's tent in Genesis chapter 18, one of the very first things he does before the main meal is even ready, is set curds and milk in front of them. It's the ancient equivalent of putting a cold drink in someone's hand. The second they sit down, milk shows up in a much darker story too. In Judges chapter 4, a defeated general named Sisera flees a lost battle, exhausted, and stumbles into the tent of a woman named Jael. He asks her for water. She gives him milk instead, almost certainly soured and thickened, closer to yogurt than a glass of milk. And once his guard is fully down, the story takes a violent turn that has nothing to do with what he drank. But notice the detail the text bothers to include. Milk wasn't just a beverage. It was hospitality itself, rich enough to make an exhausted, desperate man feel completely at ease. So why does milk actually do that? There's real biology behind it, not just poetry. Goat and sheep milk, which is what nearly everyone in the biblical Near East was actually drinking, since cow's milk was comparatively rare, in that terrain has noticeably smaller fat globules than cow's milk. Studies measuring this put goat milk fat particles at roughly 2 to 3 microns across, on average, compared to something closer to 4 to 5 microns in cow's milk. Smaller globules mean more surface area for your digestive enzymes to work on, which is a big part of why goat's milk has a reputation, even in ancient medical writing, for sitting easier in the stomach than cow's milk does. And most of that milk wasn't drunk fresh anyway. It soured and fermented within hours, because nobody had refrigeration, and raw milk in desert heat turns fast. That's not a flaw in the system. It's arguably an upgrade. Fermented dairy, the ancestor of what we'd now call yogurt or kefir, is full of live bacterial cultures that support gut health, something modern nutrition science only discovered a few decades ago. Shepherds in the Bronze Age just knew it from experience, the same way your grandmother knew which foods agreed with her long before anyone could explain why. Here's an honest question for you. When's the last time you drank a glass of milk on purpose? As an adult, not in a latte, not poured over cereal, just milk, because you actually wanted it. For most of human history, milk wasn't a kid's drink stuck at the bottom of a lunchbox. It was one of the most valuable things you could hand, a guest, a soldier, or a stranger who showed up at your tent. So milk was hospitality. Milk was survival. But it's only half of the most famous phrase in the whole Old Testament. What's the other half? And are you actually sure you know what it means? Part 3. Honey, and the dates hiding behind it. Here's a fact that surprises almost everyone. When the Bible says honey, In most of those land of milk and honey passages, it's very possibly not talking about bees at all. Beekeeping did exist in the ancient Near East. Archaeologists have uncovered rows of intact clay beehives at a site called Tel Rehov in northern Israel, dated to roughly 900 BC. Proof that honey production was a real, organized industry at some point in Israelite history. But a lot of scholars who study the Hebrew text argue that in the earlier, far more common uses of the word devash, usually translated honey, the writers actually meant something else. Silan, a thick, dark syrup made by boiling down dates. Think about why that theory holds up. Date palms grew reliably in the river valleys and oases of the region, producing fruit year after year in a way that hunting down wild bee colonies never could. If you needed a dependable, easily produced sweetener to symbolize a land of overflowing abundance, betting on dates made more sense than betting on finding a hive. Even manna gets described this way. During Israel's 40 years wandering the wilderness, the bread that appeared on the ground each morning is described in Exodus chapter 16 as tasting like wafers made with honey, the closest, most appealing comparison the writers had on hand for something worth waking up early to collect. That doesn't mean literal bee honey is absent from Scripture, though it shows up in some of the most vivid scenes in the Old Testament. In Judges chapter 14, Samson finds a swarm of bees and a honeycomb inside the carcass of a lion he'd killed earlier, and turns the discovery into a riddle that nearly starts a small war at his own wedding feast. In 1 Samuel chapter 14, Jonathan, exhausted and half-starved in the middle of a battle, under strict orders from his own father not to eat anything, dips his staff into a honeycomb dripping onto the ground and eats it anyway. His strength returns almost immediately. According to the text, and centuries later, John the Baptist is described in Matthew chapter 3, surviving in the wilderness on locusts and wild honey. That last detail gets misquoted online constantly, by the way. You may have run into the claim that locusts there actually meant carob pods, not insects. It's a nice story, but it doesn't really hold up against the text or the law standing behind it. Locusts were an explicitly permitted food under Jewish dietary law, listed right there in Leviticus chapter 11. John the Baptist living on bugs and wild honey isn't a mistranslation softening a harsh detail. It's just a genuinely extreme way to live, which was rather the entire point the gospel writers were making about the man. So, why did any of this dates, honey, syrup actually matter as fuel, not just flavor? Honey is one of the only foods on the planet that essentially never spoils. Its water content is so low and its sugar concentration so high that bacteria simply can't survive in it. Sealed jars of honey recovered from ancient tombs have occasionally still been technically edible thousands of years later. Dates, meanwhile, are almost absurdly energy-dense for something that grows on a tree loaded with fast-digesting natural sugars and potassium, which is exactly why cultures across the Middle East have used them for centuries as the very first bite to break a long fast. Your body barely has to work to turn a date into usable energy. That's not a modern wellness trend. That's just what the fruit does. Here's a question worth asking yourself. When you're running on empty, do you reach for something manufactured in a factory, or something your grandmother would actually recognize as food 3,000 years ago? That same craving for fast, real fuel already had an answer. Speaking of things that get misidentified in Scripture, there's one plant that's been at the center of more Bible trivia confusion than almost anything else. And it's not John the Baptist's locusts. It's hiding inside one of Jesus' own most famous parables. Part 4, CAROB. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus tells the story of the prodigal son, the younger brother, who takes his inheritance early, burns through every cent of it, and ends up so broke and so hungry that he's feeding pigs for a living in a foreign country. Then comes the detail that usually gets skimmed past. He gets so desperate that he starts eyeing the slop. He's feeding the pigs, and nobody will even spare him that much. The pigs are eating carob pods. The Greek word in the original text is caration. It's not a mystery, and it's not really up for debate. Biblical scholars overwhelmingly agree this refers to the carob tree, Ceratonia siliqua, one of the most common trees across the entire Mediterranean world. So buried inside, one of the most famous stories Jesus ever told is a completely real, completely mundane detail. When you hit absolute rock bottom in first century Judea, carob pods were what was left. They were animal feed. They were famine. Food. They were the last resort. And everyone listening to Jesus that day would have understood the reference instantly, which makes it a little strange that this exact tree ended up lending its name to one of the most glamorous words in the English language. Here's the trivia night fact. The word carat, as in a 1-carat diamond, comes directly from caration. Carob seeds are small and, according to ancient traders, remarkably consistent in size, consistent enough that people started using them as tiny counterweights on scales when weighing gold and gemstones. A Roman gold coin called the solidus was even defined as the weight of exactly 24 carob seeds, which is exactly why 2 4-carat gold still means pure gold today. To be fair to modern science, though, researchers who've actually studied carob seeds closely found they weren't perfectly uniform. After all, the constant weight idea turns out to be partly an optical illusion because humans are surprisingly good at eyeballing out the one oversized seed in a handful. But the myth was convincing enough to build an entire measurement system on top of, one we still use every time a jeweler weighs a diamond. So this food of last resort also ended up precious enough to help define what precious even means. That's a genuinely strange piece of history to carry around in your pocket. Later Christian tradition, especially around the Mediterranean, started calling the carob tree stiti paste, John's bread, a folk nickname built on the idea that it may have sustained hermits and desert monks the same way it sustained the prodigal son. Worth being straightforward about that one. It's tradition and legend, not scripture. The Bible itself never draws that specific connection, but it tells you something about how deeply this plain, unglamorous pod worked its way into how people across the Mediterranean thought about survival and simplicity for centuries afterward. So what was actually inside it, nutritionally? Carob pulp is naturally sweet. The pods run close to half sugar by weight, with a solid amount of dietary fiber and a real, if modest, amount of calcium and potassium. It has no caffeine at all, and none of the oxalates that make chocolate's calcium harder for your body to absorb. It doesn't hit you the way a shot of espresso does, because it isn't trying to. Coffee works by blocking the receptors in your brain that signal tiredness. A chemical trick, not fuel. Carob works completely differently. Its natural sugars get metabolized the ordinary way, releasing energy gradually instead of a jolt followed by a crash. 2 different mechanisms doing 2 different jobs. One isn't simply a bigger version of the other. But if what you actually wanted was something that fed you, rather than fooled you, this pod, hanging wild on trees across Galilee with no irrigation and no maintenance, living for a century or more, was quietly doing that job, for free, for everyone, for thousands of years. Every drink covered so far has been about staying alive through a hot afternoon, a long journey, a famine year. But there's one more drink in the Bible, and it doesn't show up at a wedding or a well. It shows up at the exact moment a man is dying. And we already told you where. Part 5. Wine, the jar we opened with. Wine runs through the entire New Testament, like a heartbeat. Jesus' first recorded miracle, in John chapter 2, is turning water into wine at a wedding in Cana. The man running the event doesn't know where the new wine came from, only the servants know, and his reaction isn't gratitude so much as confusion. Every host he's ever worked for serves the good wine first, while guests can still appreciate it, then quietly switches to the cheap stuff once everyone's had enough to stop noticing the difference. Whoever refilled those jars broke that rule in the most generous direction possible. At the Last Supper, in Matthew chapter 26, Jesus hands his disciples a cup of wine and tells them it represents something about to change everything. Throughout the Gospels, wine means celebration. It means abundance. It means a promise being kept, which makes the jar we opened with feel even more unsettling by comparison. Let's rebuild that scene properly, because most retellings skip a step. Before the crucifixion even begins, in Mark chapter 15, and in a parallel account in Matthew chapter 27, someone offers Jesus wine mixed with a bitter substance, myrrh. According to Mark's account, essentially a mild sedative, a customary small mercy offered to people about to be executed, meant to dull the pain a little before it started. Jesus tastes it and refuses it. He chooses to face what's coming with a clear mind, fully present. Hours later, near the very end, he says 2 words: "I thirst." That's when the second drink appears, not offered out of mercy this time, but grabbed from whatever happened to be sitting nearby, a jar of sour wine, a sponge, a branch to lift it to his mouth. Historians have a name for that sour wine: Posca. It isn't a mystery ingredient. It's one of the best documented drinks in the entire Roman world. Posca was cheap wine vinegar, cut with water, sometimes flavored with herbs. Roman soldiers drank enormous quantities of it. It was standard issue army ration for centuries, from the Republic all the way into the Byzantine period. There's even a Roman decree from 360 AD ordering lower-ranked troops to drink posca and wine on alternating days. Cato, the Elder, one of Rome's most famously tough generals, was recorded by Plutarch as drinking nothing but water and posca on campaign, occasionally adding a splash of real wine only when his strength was failing. Emperor Hadrian reportedly drank it too, specifically to show solidarity with the troops he led. Here's why it worked so well for people doing brutal physical labor for a living. The acidity in vinegar kills off much of the bacteria that made local water supplies dangerous, which mattered enormously in a world with zero water treatment. And the fermentation process that turns wine into vinegar happens to preserve vitamin C, meaning posca doubled as basic protection against scurvy for men on long campaigns, centuries before anyone understood what vitamin C even was or why it mattered. More than one historian has half-jokingly called it the ancient world's version of a sports drink. So the detail most retellings quietly skip is this: the soldiers at the foot of the cross weren't improvising something cruel out of nowhere. They reached for the exact same drink they carried on their own belts every single day of their working lives. Whether offering it to Jesus was meant as mercy or as mockery is something scholars still genuinely debate. A sponge soaked in the standard issue soldier's ration, lifted on the end of a stick, doesn't read as obviously either one. But it was real. It was ordinary. And the Gospel of John adds one detail that turns it from ordinary into something else entirely. It says the sponge was lifted to him on hyssop. That's not a random plant choice. Hyssop shows up at exactly 2 other moments in the entire Bible that carry this much weight. In Exodus chapter 12, God instructs the Israelites to dip hyssop branches into the blood of the Passover lamb and mark their doorposts with it, the sign that lets the angel of death pass over their homes on the night they escape Egypt. And in Psalm 51, King David, drowning in guilt after his worst moral failure, begs God to purge him with hyssop and make him clean again. Across the entire Old Testament, hyssop is the plant of protection and cleansing. And then, at the very last moment of Jesus' life, in the one gospel that spends the most time deliberately connecting Jesus to Passover imagery, hyssop shows up one final time, lifting an ordinary soldier's ration to his lips. Received this time, not refused. Right after, John tells us, Jesus says, "It is finished," and breathes his last in. You don't have to be religious to notice that a detail like that doesn't usually make it into a story by accident. So there's the answer to the question we opened with. Not a rare health food substitute nobody's heard of. Not a miracle cure hiding in a supplement aisle. Just 5 ordinary things: water, milk, honey, carob, and a cheap soldier's ration of vinegar wine that happened to be present at nearly every major moment in the story the Bible tells, from a well outside a Samaritan town to a hill outside Jerusalem. None of it needed a brand name. Water came from digging. Milk came from keeping animals alive through hard seasons. Honey came from bees or from patience with a date palm. Carob grew wild on a tree that asked for nothing and lived 100 years without complaint. And even the vinegar wine handed to a dying man was just what happened to be sitting there, because that's simply what people carried. Here's a genuinely simple question to leave you with. What's the last thing you drank today that you could actually trace back to where it came from? Not the brand on the cup, not the drive-through window, the actual source. You don't need to reenact a Roman army ration to sit with that question. But tomorrow morning, before you automatically reach for whatever's easiest, the pod machine, the drive-through cup, you might try something with a real, traceable story behind it instead. Warm water with a spoon of real honey and a squeeze of lemon. A cup of carob powder, naturally sweet, steeped in hot water, no caffeine required, and no crash waiting on the other side. Nothing dramatic, just something you could explain, ingredient by ingredient, to someone sitting across from you. 2,000 years ago, nobody needed a video to explain what was in their cup. They already knew exactly where it came from. That's the part worth bringing back, not one specific pod or one specific jar, but the plain, almost old-fashioned habit of knowing exactly what's in your hand and exactly why it's there. If one of these 5 caught you off guard, that's really the point of this channel. The Bible has more real, checkable detail hiding in it than most people ever get shown. Subscribe if you want more of it. And tell me in the comments. Out of the 5, the well, the milk, the honey, the carob, or the vinegar wine, which one did you not see coming? I'll be reading. See you in the next video.